Happy homecoming, Riverside Church. Welcome back to all of us as we celebrate our shared life and look together toward a year filled with health and hope. Joining me in welcoming all of us today is Eleanor Fosdick Downs, whom you just met by video. As you heard, she celebrated her 107th birthday last week. She is the eldest daughter of the very first pastor of this church, Harry Emerson Fosdick. Over the course of her amazing lifetime, she's witnessed the founding and the entire history of this congregation, and she's still connected to the life of the church. As you might imagine, she has some incredible stories to tell, some of which she shared with me and Reverend Jim Keat when we traveled to Boston last week to visit with her. During Prohibition, she told me, a lot of my friends were flappers. I was never a flapper, of course, she said. I asked why, because I think those dresses with the little fringe are really cute. She told me that it was because when she was in high school, her father pointed to a door entering a building across the street from where they lived, probably somewhere near Barnard today, and explained to her what a speakeasy was. He told me to never go in that door, she explained. So instead, I would stand at the window and watch who was going in and out. Clearly, Eleanor Fosdick Downs knows more about the history of this church than probably some would find comfortable. One of the most powerful things about getting to know Dr. Downs is hearing the way she talks about the influence of this church over the entire span of her life. A celebrated physician long before women were commonly doctors, a young widow whose husband was killed in World War II, a single mother of 2 young children, a fixture at Harlem Hospital and Columbia University. Throughout her long and full life, this congregation has been a source of comfort and strength for her and her family. Further evidence that part of living a good life is finding a good community, colleagues, friends, family, a church that walk with us on the journey of life, reminding us of possibilities, holding our hands during tough times, and helping us see them as adventures, as Dr. Downs says, pushing us forward toward a dream of shared flourishing. In short, you cannot live a good life alone, as Eleanor Fosdick Downs, 107 years old, would tell us. We've been wondering these past few weeks, what does it take to live a good life? Throughout human history, every generation has asked that question, and it's a consideration of every single major world religion. In the Christian tradition, as you know, answers appear most readily in the wisdom literature of the Bible, Song of Songs, Ecclesiastes, Job, part of Psalms, and of course Proverbs, where we've been for the past few weeks and end today. Our task this morning is then to ponder what this passage from Proverbs 31, the final chapter of the book, has to say in answer to the question, how do we live a good life? There was much discussion around the church office this week about who would lead the reading of the Proverbs passage that's printed in your bulletin today. Much to the surprise and dismay of some of my colleagues, I insisted that a man should do it. Thanks, Brad. And here's why. At first glance, this passage seems to be describing qualities of successful womanhood, a litany that should make anyone in this day and age feel deeply uncomfortable because of the ways in which women are regularly disregarded, maligned, abused in our society and around the world. I wanted you to hear the passage in a male voice so you could feel this discomfort, and so that as we look at the passage, we can begin by acknowledging that organized religion, along with society at large, has been a leader in the suppression and oppression of women, using passages like this one to keep women in their place, to prescribe limitations on the achievements and roles of women, to even justify abuse and marginalization of women. I'm sorry to make you stand in like that, Brad, but it was important to name it up front. Proverbs 31 is the most commonly read passage in the entire book of Proverbs, and it's known by various names like a virtuous wife or a woman of worth. On its surface, it speaks to the qualities of a good wife, and it describes what one commentator called a spiritual Martha Stewart. Make your own clothes, get up in the middle of the night to get everyone else going, take care of the family business, work into the night, and have something to give those in need, always be strong and dignified, and have something profound to say, but also laugh a little, and finally, don't take yourself so seriously. This passage is regularly used for eulogies at funerals and in wedding ceremonies. Boy, I would just run back down the aisle if I heard that. And very often, preachers use this passage as a text for preaching on Mother's Day. The first time I heard a sermon on this text on Mother's Day Sunday, I will never forget it. The preacher was a white Southern Baptist man preaching from the pulpit of a church in rural Louisiana. I was 19 years old. I listened as he lauded the many qualities of a good wife. She's a good cook. She can make a mean casserole, he said, and she always does what her husband tells her to do. It's important to her to make him look good. And she's always put together, looking mighty fine all the time. You know, sometimes you see these women in the Piggly Wiggly wearing pink plastic curlers in their hair while they shop. That's just wrong. A godly woman, a good wife, would never embarrass her husband by grocery shopping with pink plastic curlers in her hair. He went on with the sermon, and the congregation laughed a little uneasily, no doubt, the women feeling his disapproval. As for me, to this day, I find it difficult to read or hear this text without wanting to immediately put pink plastic curlers in my hair and go grocery shopping. And of course, the reading and hearing of this passage comes on the heels of what has been a very difficult week to be a woman in America. The most disheartening of my recent memory, and that is saying a lot. American women, well, we've heard the message loud and clear from the halls of power to the religious platforms of evangelical leaders and even in the voices of other women, that our stories and our experiences are not important or valuable, especially when they impede or tarnish the reputation of a powerful man. And so especially this week, I don't think reading this passage, Proverbs 31, either as advice for a young man looking to choose a good wife or as a checklist for a woman hoping to be one, is helpful in any way for anyone who wants to live a good life. So what are we going to make of Proverbs 31, this assigned passage for this week? Week 3 in a series of asking the question, how do I live a good life? Well, let's begin here. In the composition of biblical literature, there's no coincidence about how a book of the Bible begins and ends. Today's passage, Proverbs 31, is the very last chapter in the book. And you'll recall last week, Reverend Lynn Castile Harper introduced us to a character in the book of Proverbs, woman wisdom, who appears in the very first chapter of Proverbs. Throughout the entire book of Proverbs, we're invited to understand the wisdom of God as a woman. Recall what happened to woman wisdom back in chapter 1. Wisdom cries out in the street. In the square, she raises her voice. At the busiest corner, she cries out. At the entrance of the city gate, she speaks, "How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? You have ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof." At the very start of the book of Proverbs, we encounter a woman wisdom who is fed up tired as the day is long of proclaiming a good way to live a life, and nobody is listening. 30 chapters later, we meet another woman, the good wife, who has seemingly heard and heeded the advice of woman wisdom and appears at the city gates to be lauded by everyone around her. Just look at her life and how it's turned out. Consider the qualities of the wise woman in Proverbs 31. She wants the best for everyone around her. She lives her life responsibly and industriously. She makes sure to live with a spirit of abundance, insisting that there's more than enough for everyone. She can and does articulate a hopeful vision for the future. She actively gives other people agency. She is a beautiful, generative presence, her fear and respect for God evident, contagious even. I don't know exactly why wisdom is depicted as a woman in the book of Proverbs, although I could venture a guess. But we're told over and over to listen to her, to emulate her, and here in this final passage of Proverbs, to follow the lead of one who lives a life persistently practicing the way of woman wisdom, working to live a good life, honed by discipline and the development of good character. In the book of Proverbs, wisdom is a woman. You can be pretty sure then that Proverbs 31 is not about whether or not a virtuous woman wears curlers to the grocery store. This passage is about living a good life by choosing and being a good community. 3 years ago, I told you about an article in the New York Times that told the story of a man named George Bell, a man who lived and died all alone, his body undiscovered for days after his actual death. It's a very sad story. One of the most moving parts of reading that story for me was a telephone call that I made to a man named Juan Plaza, the New York City police inspector who investigated the George Bell case and who was interviewed for the New York Times story. I called him because I wanted to know, is it a normal thing for people to die alone with nobody to even miss them? He told me this is an everyday thing, a regular occurrence in New York. And then I asked him, how does encountering that kind of loneliness leading to death that nobody notices impact the perspective of the living? How does this affect you? This is what he said to me. When I started working in this office, my whole life changed. I saw so many things that made me think, I don't want to be one of those people. I want to live my life caring about the people I love. And I need someone to care about me too. I just don't want to be someone who dies alone. New York is a place with a lot of people from all over the world, but we live busy lives and we rush so much, and sometimes we forget each other. We're moving so fast that we don't talk to the people we love. I think encountering a story about someone who lives and dies alone makes me remember that we all want to live lives that leave a legacy of love and friendship. What a shame it would be to read or recite Proverbs chapter 31 as the job description for a good wife. This beautiful Hebrew poetry has so much more to offer us than that. It is, in fact, an invitation to all of us to live a good life. What if each one of us determined to live like the woman we meet in Proverbs 31? Could you just imagine the kind of community we could be and have and model for the whole world? Today's Homecoming Sunday here at Riverside, and it's a good day to think about who we are and who we want to be together, because living a good life takes being and cultivating a good community. So take a minute and look around at each other. Is this the community we want to seek to build and to be? When we look at this community, are we together living out the gospel in the world? If not, we have work to do, because how we live in relationship with each other and how we nurture our souls is how we change injustices around us, and it's how we live a good life. At the end of Proverbs 31, the husband of the good wife says this about her exemplary life. But I suggest that the world could change if we, Riverside Church, could say this about each other. Many have done excellently, but you surpass them all. May it ever be so in this place. Amen.